Hello, everyone. My name's Aaron Grossman. I'm a third grade teacher at Roygam Elementary in Washoe County School District. And this is Marilyn Steffen, who's a third grade teacher at Bud Beasley. Right now we're in her classroom and we're recording a video for Unit 6 in which kids are going to be focusing on the essential question, what helps us solve problems? And before we launch into our general reactions to the set of resources, as well as opportunities to elevate, we're even going to share a few student artifacts today, we thought we'd start with our hot tip. So Marilyn, we have a little twist on this. What is your hot tip when we're planning for a sub?
Okay, so a quick way to plan for your sub that we have compiled for you, and it's on the website, is first of all, the Read Aloud Handbook. Aaron has so generously taken time to create pictorial supports for each read aloud in the units. And then I took his pictorial supports and I made a screencast of the read aloud with the picture support. And so this can be played for the students when you have a substitute. Real quick, put it in there, and then there are questions that you can add to it too. So it can become a complete lesson that's right there at your fingertips on our website. So that's my quick hot tip.
And those pictorial supports that she just mentioned, so those are just Google slide decks. We've marked them with paragraph numbers so you sort of know when to turn the page. And so similarly, which is, so Marilyn mentioned a little tip for planning for a sub, and I'm thinking about when I have a student who is absent, I've been using the screencast from Marilyn so I can put those in front of the kids so they don't miss that read aloud and that content altogether. And then similarly, which is if you're in the benchmark universe, we can find those read alouds for the students. And then I have put on Avery 5160 labels what I think are the best questions with those read alouds.
I have that here, how I keep that. I've done that, what Aaron is saying actually, and I run off the questions and put them in each bag. So for an emergency situation, you can pull, you have the questions, the books are right here in the bag, and the kids just peel these off and stick them in their journal or on a piece of paper if that's how you run that part of it.
And I think that's just, so that similarly, which is when these kids are absent, I'm taking those stickers, I'm just taking screen captures, sending them to the parents or sending them home on an 8.5 by 11 piece of paper with a sibling. And then because we're cherry picking just maybe 3 or 4 of the best questions, I think it's a very doable assignment. And that way, when the kid walks back into the classroom, they have a very similar set of background knowledge as their classmates had, although they were absent for a period of time.
I think it's a really good idea because there's such limited time. You really can't go back all the time, and doing the read alouds and the stories takes extra time, and they need to be where you are going forward.
And then there was one other thing that you've been putting in front of these subs. Do you want to share that one?
Yes, actually. You also wrote these text-dependent questions. So these text-dependent questions go with the close read story. And so if you're not there and you want some accountability and also for the kids to dig deeper in the text, Aaron has typed up text-dependent questions that go with each story in your close read. So this is The Fox and the Geese, Unit 6.
And
first story.
Again, for the child who is absent, this is my hot tip. So, I can get the read aloud in front of them. I can get the leveled reader questions and the text itself in front of the students. So if the student is absent, so much of benchmark is about the teacher modeling and explaining and then the kids practicing so that sort of I do, you do, or excuse me, I do, we do, you do. If they are not present for that, the student can still access the text in the benchmark universe. Mm-hmm. And then they can have these text-dependent questions, which don't require the full facilitation of the teacher necessarily. Some of these will be particularly rigorous questions, so it's helpful to have their classmates.
Right.
But at least they have.
See a few, especially on the vocabulary on that first story and some of the questions that it's asking. They are a little bit more. Can you give me your general reaction to the texts in Unit 6? What helps us solve problems?
It's funny. I feel like there are 3 or 4 videos in which I end up holding this part of the teacher's manual in front of people, in which the publishers of the program have outlined the text complexity of each one of these selections. And what stood out to me almost immediately is a couple of things. One, the meaning is more challenging in a lot of these selections, largely because it's kind of ambiguous what the theme is or what kids are supposed to be taking away from some of these stories, especially since we're talking about the Brothers Grimm. And then similarly, the knowledge demands in some of these stories is particularly challenging, especially the 3 spinsters in which they're talking about taking flax and spinning it into linen. And then you're supposed to be able to make some inferences about 3 of these sisters who are introduced. So you need a lot of background knowledge to really unpack a lot of this, and we'll talk about opportunities to elevate how we can sort of mitigate some of that confusion. But in terms of meeting the demands and the expectations of our standards in which kids are working with sufficiently complex text, I'm excited about that part, but also wary in knowing that it's going to take a lot of instructional moves to really get kids deep inside of some of these texts. All right, so we outlined our hot tips, things that we can do to assist our subs when they're in our building, or students who might be absent, some general reactions largely built around this idea of text complexity. And then what I think most people are sort of watching for, which is where are we going to leverage what we know about good instruction, all of those things that we've been done over the years as we've been in education to elevate this particular unit in which we're learning about what helps us solve problems.
Okay, so since the students are supposed to be doing narrative writing from the point of view of another, to use a very favorite resource of mine. I noticed down here on the first read, scaffolding, this is on page 104, it says ways to scaffold the first read. And students they can partner read, but they need to ask each other who, what, when, where, and how questions about the text to get to the main parts. Well, if you remember the Writing Revolution graphic organizer that we have told you about before, and I think Erin posted one of these online, asks those questions. So as the kids go through and read the text, they can keep track here and then do a summary sentence of this genre of writing, because in the past lesson where we were doing innovations, they were writing more nonfiction, summarizing about facts about inventors. And this actually helps them to focus more on the story elements, but looking at this same format again. So they get used to that writing over and over. And I can't tell you how my kids have just boosted their writing in the short time that I started this after observing it in your own classroom. So I'm a firm believer that this is helping them. I think they feel more comfortable sitting down to start writing because they're not just going, what do I write? They have a guideline, they have clue words, and it says that's how you scaffold the first reading. So I don't see why they can't do that in any reading.
And so it was great. So Marilyn came, I think when we were recording for Unit 5, and so she spent the half a day in my classroom before we recorded that video. And that summary sentence activity, a couple of things. So there's a video of me that we posted up on YouTube in which my kids are engaged in that. And we actually used the read aloud from the Read Aloud handbook as the background or the piece that we're going to be doing a summary sentence from. And I'm going to be presenting on the same instructional move here February 22nd at the Northern Nevada Social Studies Conference that anybody can attend. So if you happen to be in Northern Nevada, and if you're not, if you're in California, if you want to drive over from Sacramento, that falls on a Saturday, and of course we'd love your attendance for that. So I'll be doing a session where I bring up the summary sentence as well as 2 other instructional moves, including a positives, to assist students with their writing.
Nice.
And not that this is supposed to be a whole vlog on summary sentences, but I would also add to that, when the kids have identified so much information that they then have to put together in one sentence, that's when it really forces their hand to be thinking really judiciously about dependent clauses, about coordinating conjunctions, and for the super industrious kids, semicolons. And that's how they can squeeze that all in without violating the principle of all you get is one sentence. All right, so what else do you have in terms of opportunities to elevate here in Unit?
Well, the other thing I want to mention, and it's been on our website, is we did make bookmarks that have like how to start the narrative, because most of the writing is narrative, the beginning, middle, end, the events that happen. Sentence starters for kids if they're stuck and they don't know what to write. It's just another guide for the students to have when they're writing. How about you?
So we're both actually, so the timing of making this video is a little bit interesting in that we've both started Unit 6. And so I actually can bring some artifacts with you, or I can share some artifacts just now. So one of the things that kids have to do within week 1 is they're going to take, I think of it sort of as a small moment, and they're going to build it out. So kids have identified in this unit different character traits. In the first selection, it's about the fox, and so he's described as sneaky, greedy, and unsympathetic, and you've had those conversations, you've annotated for those things, and then you're supposed to write a narrative around one of those characteristics. I did it a little bit differently, and the impetus for doing this, and I'll embed a couple of images in our video. On both Park and SBAC, it's not uncommon where the kids will get the first start of the story, and then they have to finish it. So they have to be able to actually write a middle and closure. Or they will be given the end, and then somehow they've got to create the introduction and the body to get them to the closure. And so that's what we did here. So for my students, we said, look, we've identified the fox as sneaky. How did the fox become sneaky? And so they had to write, they already knew the closure. The fox is sneaky. How did he get there? Or he was greedy, or he's unsympathetic, although most of my kids used the word, instead of unsympathetic, kind of selfish, which I think was probably an appropriate way of describing the fox. So it's interesting how these kids chose to do it. We already know their closure. Well, for this student, she said, when Fox Edward was a kid, he went to school. So she even included a positive there. So she's giving the fox a name. At school, he met Jaguar, who was a bully. Every day, Jaguar pushed Edward down into a rose bush. Each day, Jaguar said to Edward, "You are small and stupid." This made Fox very unkind. So now we're getting the backstory on why is it that Fox behaves the way he does with these geese. And so she continues with all of these examples in which he bullies other students, pouring coffee on them. Fox even gets to one point where he's starting pouring gluey slime on his teacher, Mr. Grossman. And then from that day forward, he was always unkind to everybody he met. I had a couple of students who wrote about how he is sneaky. So this student, and I also put one other thing up here. If you look at little edits in the margins, these are the peer edits.
I was just looking at what the kids were writing.
So when they are peer editing, they have to give feedback. So she wrote, when Fox Henry was born, his parents demanded that he become a good hunter. They spent every morning and every evening in the forest. One day they told Henry time to practice catching, and she invented this, a wolficorn. Fox thought the task would be easy. He skipped into the forest singing his favorite song at the top of his lungs. Suddenly, a wolficorn jumped out and threw him into a river. Fox realized, maybe I should learn to hunt quietly. So this is how he gets this attribute of sneaky. And so she continues on about how he ends up attending a school where he's taught in the ways of being sneaky.
Cute.
And then, boom, a couple of weeks had passed, and that's how Fox became sneaky. So she ended with, we know he's sneaky. How did he get to that closure? So I like the activity because I think it does make them stronger writers. It sticks with the expectations of narrative. And then, the best test prep is authentic test prep. And so I know that I'm getting ready for these cold experiences.
That's really amazing. So are you saying you used a graphic organizer to set them up for that, or you just had a conversation with them? Like, what's the backstory of how did he get sneaky?
And that's exactly what we did. And I think at this point, because we're in January, we've had so many conversations about, right, what are we always going to see at the beginning of a narrative? And the answer is we're going to see character setting and some rising action. So they already knew what's going to happen in the first paragraph. And then it's, right, so if in that first paragraph we're going to make this claim that he's sneaky, how did he become sneaky?
I think that's awesome. Okay, I can visualize that now.
And so that's one. And then there's a curious moment in the second selection about the spinster sitters. And it's largely because you need a lot of background knowledge to understand this idea of spinning, because the girl, who's only called the girl, is introduced to these three sisters, one with a flat foot, one with like a cleft lip, and the other one with calloused hands or fingers. And my kids didn't understand, and I didn't cheat them of the experience. We wrestled with the text. We tried to figure out if there were enough clues to help us understand a little bit why these three characters had these three physical attributes. And then we posted it up online at Just Two Teachers. But after lesson 10 is when I would let them watch a video without any sound of just a woman spinning flax into linen. And that's when that aha moment was, they recognized, oh, that's why she has a flat foot. That's why she's constantly wetting her fingers in order to be able to get a grip on the flax itself. And so
I like that you did that, because otherwise I wonder, how did she identify these three sisters as people that she could ask to help her spin? And so it's kind of curious, did they just walk by and she asked? So having that video now, it makes sense even more to me. It makes sense to have all those pieces there. So I appreciate that you found that and shared that lesson, because I'm going to do the same thing.
And I think the hard thing for me was, right, when do you bring these videos in? And I really want them to grapple with this complex text first, and then we'll kind of build the background.
And that was a good tip. That was a good tip, because I'm not sure if I would have showed it first, or I'd have to think about it a little bit more.
And I'm going to do one more sort of opportunity to elevate, and then I'm hoping that will blend into kind of our general reactions and how we think it's going to go in the, or how we think it's going to go over the next couple weeks. And that is in my classroom. And I used to do a workshop on this for educators. on Kohlberg's 6 stages of moral development. And I have a twist on it, loosely based on the work of a guy named Rafe Esquith, in which my students understand that the classroom expectations that I have in my classroom can be sort of described through these 6 stages. So those people who've forgotten who are watching. At
Or want to look it up.
Yes. At level 1, and I can send a video so you can see the PowerPoint I used to share with classroom teachers.
That's a good idea.
At level 1, we know we can motivate kids through punishment. At level 2, it's some kind of reward, which reminds me of PBIS and token economies. At level 3, it's affirmation. So it's the teacher who says, that looks great, or the kid who comes up to you and says, is this good? And it's because they're a level 3 thinker. Level 4 is a rule. So why do we behave the way we do in the lunchroom? Is it because we're fear of punishment, or somebody just told us it was a rule? And what we really want with our kids is to get them to level 5, which is a social contract, right? We leave the lunchroom clean because it's just a nice thing to do with everybody around us.
That's a good message.
We don't bounce on a bed in a hotel room, not because there's no rule or we're going to be punished. It's just the polite thing to do with all the guests around us. And then ultimately, we hope that everybody gets to what's called level 6, just we do things because it's who we are. And most people don't get to level 6, and Kohlberg acknowledged that. But that drives a lot of these conversations, which then leads to both of us when we read these stories, which is these are very unusual stories in that many of the characters, is it fair to say, behave very badly?
Yes. I mean, the way that they're solving their problems are not necessarily the way that I would solve a problem. I think it's going to lend to some conversation with the kids. Is this the right way to solve the problem?
And if people haven't watched, so there's essentially 4 stories, 2 short reads, 2 extended reads. In the second one, this girl engages in deceit. She tricks a lot of people, and everything turns out magically good for her.
She gets what she wants in the end. And kids will see that, and I think, oh, okay, so that's what we do, because we do use stories and literature to teach kids lessons, to have discussions about it. That's why we read them good books. And I just think that maybe that's not the message I want to send, but of course you can talk about that as well.
And then in the other one, the second piece, Dr. Noah, the same thing. He just decides an opportunity for me to make an astonishing amount of money is just to pretend to be a doctor, hang a shingle, and let the public think that I'm actually a doctor when I'm not. And it all turns out really well for him.
Yes, he's got lines out the door coming to see him. And that's the picture in the end of the story, is that, well, it all worked and now I have more customers. So, yeah, I think that that's something to talk about with the kids.
And so actually kind of looking forward to that, which is very typically we always put things that resolve just the most appropriate way in front of elementary school students. In this case, this is unanticipated. So for me, we're going to describe these characters through those 6 stages of moral development.
And I appreciate you mentioning that. So I would love if you would link that, because I think a mini lesson on that before maybe we read the stories, or maybe in the middle of, after we've read them and discussed, what are some other ways to solve our problems based on those steps.
But I also think, I suspect there are a lot of people who watch or do something like a class council, in which I think, how would we resolve this particular issue in our own classroom? Or how do we react to people who engage in behavior like this, which doesn't discount all of the learning that's going to happen in there. Like I said, I think they get broad general content knowledge through a lot of these experiences with these texts, But
yes, how do you feel when people around you solve a problem this way, but you're solving in a different way, which you feel is the morally correct way, but you come out with the same outcome as somebody else? So maybe I am looking forward to it now to see where this goes.
So, and then on that vein, I probably should have thrown in the last one, which is, so I mentioned that we're going to do writing through these character traits. So when we get into week 2, you're still working on these character traits, which are right here. Right here. But maybe one of these character traits, which is, like they use words like for Dr. Crab, he's determined, he's fortunate, he's maybe insecure, but maybe we can pull out our own character traits. He's deceitful. He's conniving.
He's fraudulent.
He's fraudulent.
He's a swindler.
So we can do the same piece of narrative writing, but maybe more closely to match to how the kids might really experience some of these characters. All right, so perfect. Hot tips, reactions, opportunities to elevate, and then how we think it's going to play out in our classroom. And that describes Unit 6 for us, and we'll be back in a couple of weeks to describe Unit 7. And I think this has been a pretty fast-paced year, and this has been kind of a fun experience
Really fun for me, digging deeper.
as we share that with all these people here. And when I say all of these people, we know that people are watching these videos, but also it's great to see how many people have now been part of our Facebook group. We're past 600, I think.
We're over 650.
Oh, that's great. So please continue to be part of our community. Join the Facebook group, visit just2teachers.com. And if you haven't watched the video that we just mentioned about kids doing the summary sentence activity, we'll link to that in the description below.
Great. Well, thank you, Aaron.
Thanks, Marilyn. And happy Valentine's Day, because I think this is going to be our next major holiday for everybody.
I think so.
All right.